welcome to this video in which I'm going to read from this book, Russia and Its Rulers, 1855 to 1964, and this was kindly lent to me by my daughter, who is currently studying history and has to learn all about Russia in this time period. So I'm going to go to this chapter, which is all about Russia and its empire, nationalities and satellite states. The composition and extent of the Russian Empire changed over time. There were occasions when a policy of expansionism and Russification resulted in Russian influence extending to the Polish border with Germany, and in the opposite direction to the Far East. But the empire also shrank at times, mainly as a result of wars and revolution. Changes in central government also led to a rise in nationalist movements in parts of the empire. Russian leaders, whether Tsars or communists, dealt with nationalist uprisings either with force or by making concessions. This chapter focuses on how and why the Russian Empire changed. It also considers the consequences of such change for national minorities within the empire, and for the satellite states that emerged after the Second World War. The chapter covers the following topics: nationalities, context and definitions, Russo-Polish relations, Russification, the impact of the First World War and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. You'll have to excuse my pronunciation. Expansion in Asia, communist advances into Eastern and Central Europe after the Second World War. It also considers the debates surrounding the three in-depth topics: how far were issues relating to the empire and minorities neglected by Alexander II? To what extent did opposition from national minorities lead to the fall of the provisional government? Courageous failure. How valid is this assessment of Khrushchev's policy towards minorities, satellite states and Asia? And there's some key dates. So 1863 was the Polish Revolt. 1918 Constitution, Treaty of Brest, Litovsk, I can't say that word, sorry. 1920 Russo-Polish Armistice. 1924 Constitution. 1936 Stalin Constitution. 1939 to 40 the Winter War and impact on Russo-Finnish relations. 1945 Yalta and Potsdam Conferences. 1956 Russian invasion of Hungary. Nationalities, context and definitions. Who were the national minorities? In the middle part of the 19th century, the Russian Empire consisted of Great Russia and national minorities. That is, those who did not originate from the Russian peoples. The main national minority groups were Poland, Finland, the Caucasus and Central Asia and the Baltic provinces, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Russian Jews stand out as a unique national minority in that their geographical location was one that was artificially created and crossed the boundaries of other groups. The significance of national minorities is highlighted in the results of the first Russian census of 1897. For example, it was revealed that minorities made up about 55% of the empire's population in the Ukraine. Not all national minorities opposed the ruling elites during both the Tsarist and communist periods. As a generalization, the Finns, Baltic Germans, and Christian Armenians remained fairly loyal, whereas the Poles, Ukrainians, and Tatars were a constant thorn in the side of Russian rulers. From the point of view of the Tsars and the communists, this did not seem to matter, as they were all treated roughly the same. All leaders, to greater or lesser extent, aimed to Russify peoples of the empire in what, with hindsight, proved to be a naive and unrealistic attempt to create internal stability. The main objective of the uncooperative national minorities was, of course, to gain autonomy or even to break away from Central Russian rule and to gain independence. The experience of each national minority group in attempting to achieve autonomy and independence varied according to time and place. And there's a diagram here, which is nationalities in Russia, 1855 to 1964. The Polish, Great, Little and White Russians, Russian Jews, those from the Baltic provinces, Caucasians, Finns. And there's a map, which is the Russian Empire in 1990, showing the population of national minorities. Russo-Polish relations. Why were relations between Russia and Poland fraught with difficulty from 1855 to 1964? By the time that Alexander II took over as Tsar, Poland was firmly under Russian control. Nevertheless, located on the western edge, Poland had never obviously been part of the Russian Empire, and the Poles had a long history of attempting to break away from Tsarist rule. For example, in 1830, there was an attempted coup against Russian rule, resulting in independence, albeit for a short period of time. The rebel movement was divided, with not all Poles wanting to break away. After further decades of repression, many Poles grew hopeful that Alexander II's reformist attitude would lead to an improvement in their position. The new Tsar, though, was wary of the situation in Poland, and for a while measures to prevent insurgency that had been in place before the mid-1850s were retained. For example, Russian artillery squads based in Poland were not directly issued with shells to prevent munitions getting into the wrong hands. If military conflict broke out, the artillery would have to wait for the shells to be released from heavily guarded storage facilities far detached from artillery bases, thus delaying mobilization. The Polish Revolt, 1863. The initial reforms made by Alexander II, including the emancipation of the serfs in 1861, seemed to give renewed hope to the Poles that they would be granted certain freedoms. There was a rise in Polish nationalism, which was characterized by increased demands for political autonomy, education reforms, such as the reopening of Warsaw University, and debate over whether serfs in Poland should also be emancipated. Independence and the role of Wielopolski. Again, apologies for my pronunciation. Not all Polish people agreed with the idea of full independence. There was those who wanted to break away from Russian control completely, and also to reclaim territory in the east that had been lost by Poland to Russia in land partitions made in the 18th century. On the other hand, there were other individuals and groups that campaigned for partial independence. The latter were led by Marquis Alexander Wielopolski, appointed as Prime Minister of Poland in 1862, lasting until 1863. Wielopolski was greeted with suspicion by staunch nationalists who viewed him as Tsarist lapdog. Indeed, the Prime Minister's push for reforms and the framing of a policy that gave Poland a national identity was done only with Russian guidance and approval. The rise in Polish nationalism. Opposition from nationalists to the notion of compromise with Russia had started to mount from the middle of 1861. By the summer of 1862, there had been a swelling of patriotic fervour, as witnessed by an increase in the number of mass meetings and demonstrations. Protest extended to an attempted assassination of Wielopolski and his viceroy, Grand Duke Constantine. The Prime Minister retaliated by introducing the forced conscription of young male Poles into the Russian army, the aim being to divert the potential manpower resources away from his opponents. Unfortunately for Wielopolski, the new recruits failed to cooperate and fled to the woods to create bands of renegade rebels. A platform was laid for an attempt at a full-blown insurrection. The course of the revolt. From January 1863 to spring 1864, the Polish government faced rebellion on a wide scale. Although there were no major military confrontations, the rebels threatened the stability of government through the adoption of guerrilla warfare. There is some evidence that the rebels were supported by the Russian Land and Liberty movement, and even had the help of some sympathetic Russian military officers. For example, the rebel leader Yaroslav Dobrowski was an officer trained and deployed in the Russian army. However, the nationalist movement failed to get total support from the majority of the population. That is the peasant class. Some significant destruction and disruption did occur in the countryside, but by the middle of 1864, the Russian army had stepped in to regain control. Rebel leaders were captured and executed. The reaction from the authorities to the rebellion was mixed. Interior and Foreign Minister Gorbachev wanted Poland to be continued to be ruled by the Polish aristocracy under the control of the Russian Tsar. In opposition to this, the War Minister Milutin wanted the Polish gentry to be purged, as he believed that they had lost the support of the countryside and had even conspired with peasant ringleaders to bring down the government. His view was that Russian officials needed to be brought in to carry out administration and governance at grassroots level. Poland would then be converted into part of the bigger nation-state of Russia. After Wielopolski fled the country, direct control of Poland was placed in the hands of Milutin. The War Minister immediately put his plan into operation. Hundreds of members of the Polish nobility were exiled to Siberia. Their estates were transferred to incoming Russian officials who would take over the duties of the nobles. Polish peasants were emancipated and gained even more favourable terms than their Russian counterparts had done in 1861. They gained freehold rights to allotted lands and paid for this through a reformed taxation system. The latter resulted in all landowners paying tax, not just the peasants, to compensate those who had had property redistributed. Rural district councils were set up, similar to Zemstra, and were to contain members from all sections of Polish society. According to the historian Jeffrey Hosking, 2002, the plan laid the basis for a cross-class Polish civic consciousness which remained absent in Russia itself. The Milutin plan had a number of important consequences for Poland. The level of nationalism diminished along with the level of autonomy that the Poles had experienced before the revolt. Poland officially became the Vistula region of Russia. Russia became the official language of administration and governance. It was taught in schools to ensure that its role was consolidated. The Catholic Church was not allowed to communicate with the Vatican in an attempt to diminish its authority. It was believed that a number of bishops had been sympathetic to the rebels. What this amounted to was the start of the process of the Russification that was to spread to other territories similar to Poland. Russification ensured that until the end of 1915, Poland was considered an integral part of Russia. By the 1890s, Poland had revealed its importance in fueling Russian industrialization. A Polish proletariat emerged that showed an interest in and enthusiasm for Marxism and socialism. In 1892, a Polish Socialist Party, PPS, was formed, closely followed in 1893 by the setting up of a Social Democratic Party. Also of note was the re-emergence of nationalists who formed the National Democrats group. Polish politicians elected from these parties went on to make important contributions to the First and Second Dumas. Although along with other national minorities, their representation fell by 1914. The impact of the First World War on Russo-Polish relations. The First World War was a major turning point for Russian Poles. German successes at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes in August and September 1914 provided the impetus for a rapid advance into Russian territory. By September 1915, German and Austrian advances meant that Russia was forced to give up jurisdiction over Warsaw and Vilna, the centre of the Vistula region. Poland was free from Russian rule, although officially independence was not granted until 1918 with the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Russia-Polish War 1920. The Russian Civil War created the prospect of Poland losing its newly found freedom. But the Red Army suffered a major defeat in 1920 in its attempt to recapture Polish territory. After taking Kiev, the Red Army moved westward towards Poland. Lenin believed that by invading Poland, he would be able to free workers from their tyranny, and this would have a knock-on effect for the proletariat in neighbouring states. However, the Poles did not welcome Lenin in the way he had envisaged. Russian forces were halted outside Warsaw before being forced to retreat. On the 16th of October 1920, an armistice between Poland and Russia was signed. Polish independence was confirmed, and it was agreed that Western Ukraine and Western Belorussia should come under Polish authority. The freedom and territory gained in 1920 would remain in place until the immediate post-Second World War. The lead up to the Second World War and Russo-Polish relations. Russo-Polish relations after 1933 and until 1939 were influenced by the following developments. The Neutrality Pact between Russia and Germany, Treaty of Berlin. This was agreed on by Russia despite the fact that the Nazis were opposed to communism. Early signs of Germany's expansionist policy, hinted at by the Non-Aggression Pact between Germany and Poland of January 1934. And there's a map there which shows Russia's advances into Poland. The Russian response to the pact, annulment of Polish and Baltic non-aggression treaties from May 1934. Russia's admittance to the League of Nations in September 1934. The growing concern by the end of 1935 that Germany would attempt an invasion of Russia via Poland. The formation of the Anti-Comintern Alliance. The Anti-Comintern Alliance did not bode well for Poland. It inferred that Germany was considering a direct challenge to Russian authority, possibly through invasion. Geographically, it was only Poland that stood in the way. Besides, Hitler was also developing his Lebensraum policy. Poland and Czechoslovakia were targeted to become German territory and to provide extra living space for a growing German population. The late 1930s witnessed the tension between Russia and Germany peaking. The 1938 Anschluss of Austria suggested that it would not have taken much for the Nazis to target Czechoslovakia and then Poland for takeover. Stalin's purges and anti-appeasement stance alienated the British and French. This, in theory, meant that Russia would be left alone to defend Poland and then its own borders. Russian exclusion from the Munich Peace Conference confirmed that the Soviet Union might be left to its own devices in coping with Nazi threat. Thus, the Russian leadership proceeded to broker deals with Hitler. The ultimate deal made by Stalin with Germany was the signing of the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of August 1939. The signing of the pact was in reality an admission to Poland by the Russian leadership that the Soviet Union would not interfere in any attempt by Germany to invade Poland. When the invasion occurred on the 1st of September 1939, Russia took some steps to protect its borders. In general, though, to buy time to prepare for a possible German onslaught, Stalin watched the early stages of the Second World War unfold from a distance. His main concern was to redeploy troops to eastern Poland and the Baltic states in the hope that this would deter Hitler from entering Russian soil immediately after the September invasion. And I'm going to leave it there. So, thank you for joining me. I hope you found that interesting. I will see you soon.